Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week my special guest is Harold Buchanan. How you doing, Harold?
I'm doing great, Liz.
So, do you want to introduce yourself to us and impress the audience?
Well, I will. I will. I'm not sure I'll impress anybody, but I'll introduce myself. And let me say that it is exciting for me to be on the hottest. Well, I was going to say hottest new, but you've been at this for a while. The hottest podcast in games. This is season 2, right?
Yeah, I did a 20 episode season that started in like May. This is definitely the product of my quarantine restlessness. And yeah, now I took a break after I did 20 episodes, and here we are in the next batch.
That's awesome, and it doesn't even hurt my feelings that I'm in season 2.
Well, I like to wait until I have very specific reasons to talk to somebody, and this week we do.
We have plenty of reasons.
So, tell us about yourself, though.
Yeah, so I'm in the context of games. I'm a longtime game player and game designer. My first game design was Liberty or Death: The American Insurrection, and that was built on the coin frame that Volko Runka started with Andy and Abyss and a host of other games. So I kind of fit into that series. I love the American Revolution, so that was an easy one for me. My second game was a game called Campaigns of 1777, and it was the year 1777 between the British and the Patriots in the colonies of North America. And it was, there's some very specific problems that both sides faced and challenges. And I wanted to do a game based on that. And so I did. And that came out just over a year ago. And then I have a new game that is coming out. It's on the pre-order system in GMT, but we're working on final art and final documentation now. And that's Flashpoint South China Sea. And that's a much simpler but tense, short, 2-player card-driven game that's played on a map where you basically fight out the non-kinetic conflict between the Chinese and all the different claimants in the South China Sea in the United States. So that's kind of my game history. In real life, I'm a retired hedge fund manager. I've done a lot of big jobs in corporate America, and right now I'm a professor at UC San Diego, where I teach finance and ethics and other business-oriented topics. I consider myself retired because I have a blast teaching, and it's really just a fun job for me and a place to spend my time. And I think that's kind of me.
So, we're going to get back to your gaming repertoire soon, but you and I are on the board of a very special upcoming project that I want to take a moment to talk about, because will by the time this podcast airs, we'll have been launched for about a week.
Yes. So that's the Zenobia Award. And, this came out of a discussion that Volko Runka and I had early in the summer, where, we were frustrated. We're in an environment now where our sensitivity to social inequities has been churned up, and appropriately so. And we have, I've had some frustrations personally over, the hobby that I love, historical games, being represented by, a bunch of old straight white guys. And I don't have a problem with old straight white guys, but I would love to see more diversity of thought and maybe a more welcoming environment for those that represent some diversity. And Volko and I, we don't own a company. We're not publishers. We don't hire people. There's a lot of things we can't do that other people can. But one of the things we thought we could do is help people get access inside the hobby. And because that's what we do, right? We're designers. We have great networks. We know people in the business. We can get people access if they have a game. And so, in our intention is was at the time to create a group of people with a common interest in diversifying the group of designers in historical games. And so, Liz, that's where you and I are now board members of this organization. And probably looking back when you publish this, but on tomorrow in the future, we're going to open the website and roll it out. There's going to be some great prize money, but more importantly, some excellent mentoring and access provided to some diverse voices in the historical games portion of the hobby. And I couldn't be more excited about number one, the goal, number two, the prospects for pulling a diverse group of people into the designing group of the hobby. And, also working with people like you that I think can broaden my perspective on things and help me through a minefield of issues that, I embarrassingly are some of which are new to me. And, I have blind spots all over the place. So this is going to be great for me. I think it's going to be good for the hobby. And I think it will help people that want to participate in our hobby that for one reason or another haven't been able to.
I also am really excited about this. And, we all have blind spots, but, you know, uh, the other thing is that we all want to play interesting, fresh games that bring new perspectives to our hobby and to the historical events that we are all fascinated by. That's why we're drawn to historical gaming as a group. And I think for me, when I agreed to become a member of the board for the Zenobia Award, what really excited me the most was the fact that this isn't just, have a fully developed design and give it to us and we'll just give an award, but you have to do all the work all by yourself out in wherever you are. I like the idea that this award is going to be based around submitting proposals, then developing those ideas from sort of a nascent concept into a full game. There's going to be the offer of mentorship. And I think what I'm really hoping is going to come out of this, we never know the future, right? This is you take a risk every time you embark on a new project. But
Yes.
I think what I'm the most excited about is the possibility that not only will we have a winner who has designed a really great game, but I'm looking forward to encountering a whole, maybe new community of people who are designing interesting games, who are brought into, the club, so to speak, of wargamers through this process because they get mentored, and then, we get to meet everyone, and there's going to be all these interesting game concepts that maybe nobody thought of before. Just that rich environment that I'm hoping this is going to create is going to be amazing, in my opinion.
Yeah, Liz, I think this could yield some really cool opportunities. And my view is, and Volko's as well, is this is a grand experiment, and that we may have a bunch of ideas that affect how we treat conventions, how we work to make a diverse group comfortable in our conventions and in our meetings and playing our games. The potential paths that we can take to increase diversity are just wonderful. And the great news is that with this experiment we're going to learn a lot. The diverse voices, though, is really a cool part of all of this, because I think one of the great benefits is going to be a different perspective on what history means. Right? History is such an ominous word almost, right? I mean, it means everything. It means anything you could imagine. So imagine bringing people into the hobby that might have some view of history that's different than the Anglo-centric, Eurocentric view that we spend most of our time modeling and gaming. And maybe it's a different perspective on those topics, or maybe it's a new set of topics modeling things that we haven't even thought about. And so I'm very excited about that. But the other thing that's great, Liz, is the response. I mean, if you look at the wonderful board that you and I are a part of, the outpouring of interest and support but also the game companies, right? The publishers. They all feel the need, and they want to promote diversity in publication and design, but they're just not really sure how to do that. So I think we provide an opportunity for them to pursue that path, and that's pretty cool. And their interest in participating in looking at prototypes that we think are qualified, in helping us judge and helping us, um, uh, boy, in helping us everything, right, including sponsoring the financial part of the award, is just outstanding. So I'm excited just seeing the response within the hobby around the topic.
Same. And honestly, just purely for selfish reasons, I want to review interesting games and I want to interview interesting people for my podcast. So the more good viewpoints and great takes on history I can get, I just want them all.
Agreed.
So you mentioned Valco bringing people into the fold of game design. Is that what happened with you when you started to design Liberty or Death?
Oh, if we had 2 or 3 hours, I couldn't sing enough praises on the great Volko Runke. And I tell people frequently I love to hang out with him just because I'm hoping a little bit of his brilliance rubs off, and he doesn't like me to rub on him, but I still want something to rub off. He is incredible. The story of Liberty or Death started. I guess it did start with him. I mean, I was inspired by Andy and Abyss, and I just thought it was magnificent. I'd come back to the hobby after a long time off, kind of college, work, kids, all of those things. And then when I got to when I got started again after my kids started to college and moved out, that was when I came upon Andy and Abyss, and it was unlike anything I had seen in the conflict historical games area, and it provided some very interesting questions. Any conflict is going to have more than two people at the table. And sometimes in historical games, we pretend that there are only two people at the table. And, it's convenient and it provides you with a game. But the reality is that all conflicts have more than two, often hundreds of people at the table with different perspectives and interests and capabilities and desires. And so Andy and Abyss was the first time I saw anybody approach a conflict like that, right? I mean, World War II has been modeled to death, and of course, the belligerents in that game are clear in those sorts of games. But Andy and Abyss was just brilliant, and it was a topic again, right? I mean, a topic that we hadn't seen modeled and gamed, at least to any great extent. So I saw it and I said, I love the American Revolution, and this is kind of cool, and I think this model would serve the American Revolution because there were more than two people at the table. We talk about it very romantically as if it's the citizen patriots against the king and the British, but the reality is that there were tons of voices at the table. So just to test that, I threw together a game with the four factions, right? So kind of native peoples in America, and the patriots, and the French and the British, and the French and the British being the two most powerful nations in the world at the time. And depending on who you ask, right, you can argue about one and two, but certainly the two most. And so I thought that was, that's an interesting reflection on four major participants at the table during the American Revolution. Put a game together, created the ugliest map you've ever seen in your life. Brian Train says it looks like a flow chart, and it did. It was ugly, and played it with friends, and we had a great time. And I had no intention of ever publishing anything. I was just doing something that I thought was fun, and I wanted to tell Volko that I appreciated it. So I sent him an email with some snapshots of the game. And Volko said, his response was really quite amazing. Was, if you're going to be at Consem World, Gene Billingsley and Mike Berticelli are going to be there, and Jordan Kerr and a couple of others, and they all work on Coin, and they'd like to see it. And of course, Volko's East Coast and I'm West Coast, so that was really the best opportunity I had to get it in front of anybody. So I went to Consim World Expo, which I'd been going to, and I gave them put a copy in front of them, and we talked about it. And after they played it a couple of times and we talked about the theory, Gene looked at me and said, "Yeah, we would like to work on this." And I was shocked and amazed and happily, I agreed to go forward with them. And then, a year and a half later, we end up with the game published almost 2 years later. But it was all Volko promoting it. Now, I said, "Look, I think I can do this, but I'm going to need some help from Volko." And Volko was working on, as always, 6 different projects. So he didn't have the time to work on it, but he gave me a call every week, which I would strictly, out of courtesy to him, keep to an hour because it could have easily been 4 or 5 hours. But every week I would call Volko and I would talk him through what was going on, and he would give me his thoughts, and it was always wonderful and helpful. And just it kept me motivated. I would run into problems that I'd never designed a game before, but I would run into problems and I would be, depressed a bit because of just it didn't seem surmountable, and he would help me through that. And he's a wonderfully facilitative designer, and it's amazing how much of his time he gives to people that are designing games. He doesn't make any money off of this. It's just his love for the hobby and his love for certain ideas. And so that got Liberty or Death published. And I watch him all the time helping people with games. He's just a natural mentor, and he's gifted, and he's very good at it, and he's certainly great at design, and is happy to share it. So yeah, Volko is the epicenter of a lot of development that happens, certainly around the Coin series.
Your game, though, it represents some departures from Coin Series entries to date up until the time it was published. It's the first really historical one. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. So that was a bit different, and it's interesting when you talk to Volko about his original vision of what a coin, the Coin series would look like. It was all modern games. Now, it's ironic because right after I published Liberty or Death, um, Volko published his work on Rome and Gaul, and I think I think we were kind of breaking through at about the same time. This view that it had to be historical, and since then, a lot of things have been questioned. Right? We've the the 4-player tenet. It's been done. These coin games have been done in 3 players and 2 players. Um, with Gandhi, we see a non-violent faction that comes into to the game. So and we've seen the addition of leaders and just a whole host of things that as the system continues to grow and continues to have life. And recently the addition of a science fiction version, which I'm very excited about as well.
Do you think you're ever going to design another coin game yourself, or are you moving in other directions now?
Well, I probably have 30 games that I've started and stopped over the last 5 years. It's an occupational hazard. You just have more ideas than you have time, and sometimes you work on something and you're not excited about the opportunity. But several of those have been coin games, and I just have decided that I didn't want to complete them. Um, and because that completing them is the hard part. The idea and the first prototype super easy. But I think Mark Simonich told me once, the great war game designer Mark Simonich said, you know, the last 20% takes 80% of the time. And everybody else is sick of the game, so you're doing it by yourself. And it's so you really have to love it at that point. Um, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, certainly everything I do, I think is going to be influenced by Coin. I just so much of what he's done there. I think it's so interesting that the information is available to everybody. That there is a depth of choices. That there's massive asymmetry. That victory is different for every party. The cards are all face up. All the ones that are in play, and I think that's a wonderful models. So at a minimum, the things that I do from here on out will be heavily influenced by Volko's great work.
So your second game that you designed, so Liberty or Death, of course, emerges from a love for the coin series and an ability to apply that to United States history. But what about 1777? That's a magazine game, correct?
It is. It is. And I guess when I got back into the hobby, I never really visualized I'd be a designer. I love to tinker with games. No designer is going to be safe from my tinkering after I get their game. I'm not a believer that there's a sanctity of what's in the box. I change things instantly and all the time. So, but I never really thought I'd be a designer. And so after Liberty or Death came out, um, I had a desire to put a game in strategy and tactics. Now, Strategy and Tactics is a magazine. It's a war game magazine that has a game in it. It's been around since the 70s. And I started war game in the 80s, and I had a good buddy named John that I played with when I was growing up. And his favorite magazine was Strategy and Tactics. Well, John's not with us anymore, and I thought, what a fun tribute it would be to design a game and put it in Strategy and Tactics. Because of all the people I know, he would appreciate it the most, or would have appreciated it. So I decided to go ahead and design a game for Strategy and Tactics. So I made some proposals. They accepted campaigns of 1777, and I went forward. Now, the details of the game are kind of interesting. There's a war game designer named Mark Miklos that does the Battles of the American Revolution series for GMT Games, and they are outstanding games. If you like battles and you like the American Revolution, they're the best. And I love his work, and he's passionate about it. So we met when I was working on Liberty or Death, and we had a discussion about Saratoga, the great turning point of the American Revolution. Happened in 1777. The British surrendered at Saratoga, and that surrender was really what gave the French the confidence to join the war on the side of the Patriots. Now, Mark and I have some differing opinions on why the Battle of Saratoga turned out the way it did. Of course, you can imagine there's a very romantic recollection of the great effort by the Patriots put down the British, and the British decided we can't win this battle, and so we're going to surrender. But actually, it's a much more complex problem than that. And so what I tried to do in the game campaigns of 1777 is to provide both commanders, British and Patriot, with all of the choices they would have had at the beginning of that year, right? So coming out of the winter, you've got a large force in Quebec, you've got a large force in New York for the British, and they made a series of choices that led to a weakened army at Saratoga and thus the surrender. And so I wanted to test that hypothesis. So I provide a game where you can make all of those choices over again. And, all of these great generals from Washington, of course, to Greene to Benedict Arnold, from Howe to Clinton, even Cornwallis is involved, and Burgoyne, who was in Quebec and came south through and won Fort Ticonderoga. And you get to play all of these generals again and make the choices, and you can see if it plays out differently. And that's my view, right? Is that it was this whole series of issues and mistakes and just general hubris, with credit to Morgan Guillaume-Rotet, that drives the British into this terrible position at Saratoga. So you should be able to fight it differently, and maybe even win the war during 1777. And that's what I was trying to test, right? I had a view on the history, and that's one of the wonderful things that historical games can do. They can teach us, but what better way to teach than to say, all right, you get to make the choices and see if, given the same toolkit that as the British at that time and as the Patriots, if you would end up in the same place. That's the cool part of that game. In my opinion, it supports my contention, but you can play it and decide for yourself.
Yeah, I love the idea of historical game as historical statement. I think actually if we say, oh, it's just a game, a lot of times, if it's a historically themed game, especially, you do miss out on the interpretive aspects of it because the toolkit you're given is the toolkit the designer decided to give you. And
Yeah.
every single one of those choices is its own implication about what was historically important.
Yeah, I agree. My son is, given the COVID situation and everybody's working from home, my son and his fiance came into town, and they're staying here with us. And last night, he and I grabbed Axis and Allies 1941 and put it on the table. And it's not my favorite game, but it's a really easy game to teach. And you put World War II on the table, and you kind of start after Germans invade France and Poland, and you then kind of plot out history. And we had such a great time discussing, you know, how did the Germans get here and the Japanese, and what did they do next, and why did they do it next, and what if they didn't do this, or what if the Japanese focused all their resources on the Japanese West. And it was just a wonderful experience, and it was thought provoking for me. And I've thought about that stuff a ton. And my son, who doesn't necessarily play historical games as much as I do or you do, I could just see the wheels turning. And I thought, what a cool lesson these games can provide in fairly short order.
So, is your interest in American history something that has been with you your whole life, and it was just a hobby that kind of flung back to life when you became a game designer, or when did you pick it up?
Yeah, I've loved it. I've loved the American Revolution for I've been a student of it. The American Revolution is just full of interesting people, and an interesting time, right? And so a series of heroes, and that are thrust into really tough positions and trying to make really tough choices. And I love it as a study. It's also a study of humans that make mistakes and don't live up to expectation. It's just a wonderful drama, and I love it as much for the study of the people as the grander events. It's also an interesting tipping point in world history where you have the colonies finally rise up and say, we want to be able to manage ourselves. And we can debate how well the colonies manage themselves, right? I mean, certainly a wonderful opportunity to recognize that not just all white guys are created equal, but that everyone is equal. And you could see that the first glimmers of that hope during the American Revolution, and the fact that it didn't pan out is just a reflection that these are you know flawed human beings that are trying to do good and still miss. So I love the American Revolution for that reason. Then when I went to graduate school, I went to graduate school at MIT, which is in Cambridge. And I really, Boston is the American Revolution. If you ever, it's Disneyland for anybody that loves the American Revolution. Just walking around the streets of Boston, you feel it. And so, for example, between classes, if I had an hour and 20 minutes between classes, I could walk over to the USS Constitution and touch and taste the history there, or to Breeds Hill and see the one of the real benchmark battles of the American Revolution, and then walk back to class and not miss a beat. And being in the midst of that in that wonderful city really just woke me up to what it's like to think about that history in that time. Um, so that also was a spark, and I read profusely, and I read everything I can get my hands on about the American Revolution, and of course business and philosophy and other things. But the more you read, it just makes you hungrier and hungrier for the application of these ideas and thoughts. So that's kind of where my love for the American Revolution grew from, and has continued to grow.
That's awesome. I I identify with that when it comes to, anything Roman, getting to go travel overseas, and it's like, oh, look at this road that's still here from thousands of years ago. There's
Yes.
something really thrilling about seeing something that you recognize and yet don't, because you feel like you know it, but you never fully can. And so it's this endless weird relationship with the past.
Yes.
I love it.
So I feel pretty lucky to have had access to that great city and those incredible historical sites. And I think it's cool that, that we have access to things like, the Roman baths, the Roman roads, Hadrian's Wall, the aqueducts that I'm always so amazed at and are so beautiful. Um, but I also know that there are layers of history that are buried, that are harder to visualize, and just as interested in those.
Exactly. I mean, history is not as dead and gone as you think it is. It's always a living activity that we're all participating in. And I think nowhere better to show that than gaming. So, back to gaming. You came into game design somewhat later in life, and I am not calling you old. You are merely venerable. But but I think a lot of people feel like there's a point at which it's too late to do something. Is it ever too late to become a game designer?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so. It may be too late for me to be Mark Herman, but I'll never be Mark Herman, right? I mean, Mark is so prolific, and he's just developed so well and so much. But I'm a big believer that you're probably better at your 20th game than you were your first as a designer. So I think it's just a continual process of getting better. As a designer, if you think you have something to say about a historical period that's different, that's interesting, then you attack it. And I hope to be working on a game, on my last day on the earth. I expect to be, trying to prove out, at least to myself, some concept or idea or some observation from history that isn't as clear as it is to me. And it's never too late. You just do what you do, right? I mean, I don't think about the world in that context.
Do you think that anybody could become a game designer?
I think so. I think so. Back to the Zenobia Award, when we started this process, we recognized very early that game designers come from game players. So that's really the first qualification, I think, is that if you play a game, then you have that first basic qualification. The other question that's really tough is just the persistence, because I realized through this process early on that it's the persistent players, gamers and designers that finish. It is really hard. It's a long path. It's a lonely path. It's very rewarding. It's fun, but you just have to be persistent to finish. So that's the other key qualification. But I don't think you need to be, technically a math whiz, or you need to be a historian. And you don't need to create the most complex game design, right? That's not the reward. I mean, actually, the hardest game I've ever designed is the simplest game, which is this Campaigns of Seven, or not, I'm sorry, Flashpoint South China Sea. And it's the simplest game I've done so far, and it's been the hardest. But yeah, no, I think anybody can do it. You just have to have a heart for it, and just don't bite off more than you can chew with great expectations that kind of demoralize yourself through the process.
And of course, we are starting the Zenobia Award with the hope of helping to fix this. But how do you find a good support network as a game designer? I mean, I will say, are quite fortunate because you had the direct line to Volko. But how do game designers find, you know, some other people to make this process less lonely?
Right. It's a good question. And I never had a direct line to Volko. I mean, I do now. He and I are friends, and we play games together and we talk, which I feel I'm so grateful for. But I didn't have a network. I started really not knowing anybody. I didn't even know what companies were involved when I got back into the hobby. But I'm a pretty good networker, and that led me to create a network of people that could support and consider and help me and exchange ideas and mentor and all those other things, right? So I think that, I think you got to get started in that network if you want to design and you want to be effective and you want other people to be helpful and hear you. One of the things that I did early on was I decided that I was going to play test. And I did it for a number of reasons. One is I wanted to see the process and I wanted to see how feedback happened and how they considered it and what they said about it and what was important and what wasn't. So I went to a couple of companies, and most notably Decision Games, because I know they kick out a ton of war games and historical games. And so I said, I just want to be a playtester. And so they plugged me into the process, and I play tested for them, a couple of years before I did anything with Liberty or Death. And that enabled me to meet people, to meet designers, to start that network. So go volunteer and start your network that way, right? Volunteer as a playtester, volunteer as a rules editor. This is a hobby of volunteers. There's nobody that makes any money, certainly not in the historical game area. And I'm happy to do the math to show anybody that that's the case. And none of us are in it because we want to be rich. That's not the place to get rich, quite frankly. So use your time and the gifts that you have to start generating a network. And all of these companies need people to read rules and give them comments. And then when you get the shot, do a great job. Be the best playtester they've ever had. Be the best rules reader editor they've ever had. Go to conventions and volunteer there and meet people that way, right? And just be a standout. And when you become a standout, you develop a outstanding reference, and then you develop people that are appreciative of you and will help you with that. And I think in the context of Zenobia, Liz, it was clear, that I'm pretty good at it, and it's easier for me, and it's not easy for everybody. And so I lay that out there like it's easy, but I also know that um, if you are a member of one of these communities that isn't represented, right? If you're a gay male or you're a female or a person of color, it's much harder to network amongst these old white guys. And it's not because these old white guys are mean and trying to keep you out. It's just harder. And we talk about blind spots. I recognize it's harder. I can't tell you that I understand every reason that it's harder, but I know it is. So we decided that in the award, we really had to provide better access, mentorship, and access to the game companies that people aren't going to be able to get on their own if they're, if they're not in that community of old white guys.
Fair enough. And I am really excited about both your next designs, and also I'm very excited about the work that we're about to do with Zenobia. So with that, we are going to have a Zenobia website that goes live tomorrow as of this recording. I'm going to put that in the show notes. Where else can people reach you, Harold?
Well, at H Buchanan 2 on Twitter and HBUCH on other social media platforms. San Diego Historical Games Convention, which we just did and we did online. That's, I'm around that all the time. So there's a website there. And of course, I'll give the verbal Zenobia Award. It's going to be zenobiaaward.org. If anyone's interested in digging into the website, we'd love to have people see it and share it and tell us what they think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Harold, for your time. I really appreciate this chance to do another podcast together where I got to interview you.
I felt like I didn't ask enough questions, Liz, but it was a real pleasure, and congrats on all the success of what you've done so far.
Thank you so much. And everybody who's listening, feel free to reach out to either of us. Harold just gave you his info. I'm everywhere as Beyond Solitaire, and happy gaming, y'all.